The moment I looked at the empty chair to my right, I knew my son wasn't coming. The private dining room of the Oakwood Grill hummed with the quiet chatter of 15 close friends and family members who had gathered to celebrate my 70th birthday. The warm, amber lighting reflected off the polished mahogany tables, casting a soft glow over the evening. But my eyes remained fixed on that one vacant seat. My phone vibrated silently in my clutch. I pulled it out and read the text message from David, sent just 2 hours before the dinner was supposed to start. Mom, so sorry. Things are crazy at work, and Sarah really needs a break. We managed to book a last-minute weekend in Aspen. We'll celebrate when we get back. Happy 75th. I stared at the screen. No phone call. No genuine apology. Just a brief text treating my milestone birthday like a rescheduled dentist appointment. I didn't cry. I didn't excuse myself to the restroom to wipe away tears. At 70 years old, I had spent enough of my life making excuses for other people's choices. I simply placed the phone face down on the table and picked up my water glass. Across the room, near the entrance, stood Nolan. He was my late husband's protégé, a young man who had spent years learning woodworking in Arthur's dusty garage. He looked slightly out of place in his neatly pressed but modest gray suit, holding a small wrapped gift and waiting politely for a chance to say hello. I caught his eye and smiled. I gestured for him to come over. Nolan navigated through the tables, his expression a mix of respect and slight hesitation. "Happy birthday, Hazel," he offered, handing me the box. I didn't want to interrupt, just wanted to drop this off. I took the gift, setting it carefully beside my plate. "Nolan, are you busy tonight?" He blinked clearly, surprised. "No, ma'am. Just heading home." I pulled out the chair to my right, the chair with the small place card that read, "David." "Then please sit down." "It seems I have an open seat." Nolan hesitated, glancing at the name card, but sitting in that chair was about to set off a chain reaction my son never saw coming. To understand why that empty chair felt so definitive, you have to understand the slow erosion that happened over the past 4 years. When Arthur passed away, something shifted in my relationship with David. I assumed grief would pull us closer. Instead, it gave his wife Sarah the perfect opportunity to rearrange our family dynamics. Sarah was a pragmatic woman who viewed relationships through the lens of convenience. She liked order control and having things her way. I didn't mind her independence, but I did mind how quickly my son adopted her perspective. Before long, my existence in their life was reduced to a utility. I became the emergency babysitter they didn't have to pay. I was the one expected to host Sunday dinners only for them to arrive 2 hours late, because Sarah decided they needed to go shopping first. Whenever I visited their house, Sarah would hand me a laundry basket or point out a stain on the rug, treating me more like the hired help than a guest. David would just stand there, buried in his phone, offering a weak shrug if I ever shot him a questioning look. I never raised my voice. I didn't stage a dramatic intervention. I simply started observing, and then I started acting. When they showed up 2 hours late for Sunday roast, they found the kitchen clean and the leftovers packed away. When Sarah dropped the kids off without asking so she could get a manicure, I handed them their coats and walked them right back to her car. "I have a gardening class in 10 minutes, I told her, shutting my front door. David called me later that night, sounding annoyed. "Mom, Sarah was really stressed. You couldn't just help out. A request is help, David," I replied calmly. "An expectation is a job, and I am retired." That set a boundary, but it didn't change his core priorities. They stopped asking for favors, but they also stopped visiting. The birthday dinner was supposed to be a bridge, a chance to reconnect. But David had just burned it, and I was done trying to rebuild. The text message about Aspen wasn't just insulting, it was deeply ironic. David and Sarah love to project an image of success, new cars, luxury vacations. designer clothes for the kids. But I knew exactly how that last-minute weekend in Aspen was funded. Years ago, when David was in college, I opened a joint checking account to help him with groceries and gas. After he graduated and got married, Arthur and I left it open. We would occasionally drop a few $100s in there for the grandchildren's birthdays or emergencies. After Arthur died, I continued the habit. It was a silent safety net. But over the last year, I noticed the withdrawals changing. The money wasn't going toward emergency plumbing repairs or winter coats for the kids. It was being swiped at high-end restaurants, boutique spas, and airline websites. They were using my quiet generosity to subsidize their lifestyle, assuming I either didn't notice or wouldn't dare say anything. They were wrong on both counts. The morning of my birthday, before I even went to the salon to get my hair styled, I took a quiet drive to the local bank branch. I sat down with a teller I had known for a decade. I didn't explain my family drama. I didn't complain about my daughter-in-law. "I'd like to withdraw the entire balance of this joint account and close it permanently," I instructed. The teller clicked a few buttons, handed me a cashier's check for the balance, and printed a confirmation receipt. The account was gone. The safety net vanished into thin air. When David's text arrived later that afternoon, blaming stress and announcing the Aspen trip, I felt a deep sense of peace. I knew Sarah had booked that resort using the debit card tied to that exact joint account. Hotels always place a hold on the card at check-in, but the real charges wouldn't process until they tried to order room service or book a ski lesson. I bought Nolan's steak dinner with my own credit card. As we clinked our glasses to celebrate, I wondered how long it would take for the front desk in Aspen to run their card. The dinner progressed beautifully. The food was excellent. The wine flowed, and the conversation was genuine. Nolan fit right in. He didn't try to dominate the conversation or act overly familiar. He listened intently, laughed at my brother's terrible jokes, and made sure my water glass was never empty. When dessert arrived, the room grew quiet. Traditionally, this was the moment the eldest child would stand up and give a toast. It was the moment David was supposed to talk about my life, my sacrifices, and our family. Instead, the silence stretched heavy with the reality of his absence. Before the quiet could turn into pity, Nolan quietly pushed his chair back and stood up. He picked up his glass, looking around the room with a calm confidence that reminded me so much of Arthur. "I know I wasn't on the original guest list," Nolan began, offering a warm smile. "And I know I can't fill the shoes of family. But I couldn't let tonight pass without saying something." He turned to me. "Hazel, when Arthur took me into his workshop 10 years ago, I was just a lost kid who didn't know how to use a table saw. He taught me a trade, yes. But you taught me what a home feels like. You always made sure there was an extra plate at the table for me. You asked about my day when no one else cared." Nolan paused, clearing his throat. "Arthur always said the measure of a person isn't what they take from the world, but what they leave behind in others. You've left a lot of kindness in me. Thank you for letting me share tonight with you. Happy birthday." The room erupted into applause. My sister wiped a tear from her cheek. I looked at Nolan, seeing the genuine gratitude in his eyes. It was a stark contrast to the entitlement I had dealt with for years. Blood didn't guarantee loyalty, and DNA didn't automatically create respect. I reached into my purse, feeling the cold, heavy metal of a small object I had brought with me. It was time to make a decision I had been weighing for months. Once the applause faded, I stood up. The room quieted down again, eyes turning toward me. I smoothed the front of my dress, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Thank you, Nolan," I said, my voice steady. "Arthur loved having you in the shop. You were the only one who didn't mind getting your hands dirty with him." I walked around the table and stopped in front of Nolan. From my purse, I pulled out a small, faded leather pouch. Inside were 2 silver keys on a worn ring. I placed them on the table, right next to his coffee cup, followed by a folded piece of heavy paper. Nolan looked down his brow, furrowing in confusion. Hazel, what is this? Those are the keys to the 1968 Mustang in my third garage bay, I replied. And that is the signed title officially transferring ownership to you. A collective gasp echoed around the room. Arthur's Mustang was a neighborhood legend. He had spent 5 years restoring it, and Nolan had been there every weekend covered in grease, helping him rebuild the engine block. David had never touched a wrench. In fact, just last month, David had casually mentioned that when I finally decided to get rid of the junk, he planned to sell the car to finance a down payment on a boat. Nolan stared at the keys, his hands shaking slightly. Hazel, I can't. That car is a masterpiece. It belongs to your family. It belongs to someone who understands its value, I corrected him firmly. You poured your sweat into that engine alongside my husband. David doesn't know the difference between a spark plug and a carburetor. Arthur wanted it driven, not auctioned off, to fund a vacation. Nolan looked up at me, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. Just promise me you'll take me for a spin on Sundays. I smiled. At the end of the table, my niece lifted her phone. She snapped a photo of Nolan holding the keys, a massive, disbelieving grin on his face. Within 10 minutes, that picture was posted online. And halfway across the country, my son's phone was about to light up. By the time I drove myself home, it was past 10 o'clock. The neighborhood was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of street lamps. I walked into my house, kicked off my heels, and placed my purse on the kitchen counter. The house felt peaceful, completely free of the tension that usually accompanied my family interactions. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat in my favorite armchair. That was when I finally pulled my phone out of my clutch. The screen was completely flooded with notifications. I scrolled past the birthday wishes from old co-workers and neighbors. Beneath them lay a mountain of panic. David had called, then Sarah, then David again, over and over. I tapped the phone icon and looked at the number. 127 missed calls. I opened the text messages. The timeline told a very clear story. At 8:15 p.m., David, Mom, did you do something to the joint account? The hotel is trying to authorize the card for our stay, and it declined. Call me. At 8:45 p.m. Sarah, Hazel, this isn't funny. The front desk is holding our bags. The teller said the account is closed. Fix this right now. At 9:30 p.m., David again, clearly having seen my niece's post on social media. Mom, are you kidding me? You gave Dad's Mustang to Nolan. That was my inheritance. Pick up the phone. At 10 p.m., Sarah. We are borrowing money from my sister to buy flights home. You have crossed a massive line. I took a slow sip of my tea, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. I didn't feel a shred of guilt. I hadn't set a trap. I had simply stopped providing the blanket. They had jumped without checking if it was still there. I didn't reply to a single message. I didn't type out a long explanation or demand an apology. I plugged my phone into the charger, switched it to Do Not Disturb, and went upstairs to sleep. I slept better than I had in 4 long years. Tomorrow, they would arrive. But I was ready. I woke up the next morning at my usual time. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, watered the hydrangeas on the front porch, and sat at the kitchen island reading the Sunday paper. At exactly 9:15 a.m., the sound of tires screeching echoed up the driveway. An Uber slammed its brakes near my mailbox. David and Sarah piled out, dragging 2 luxury suitcases behind them. They looked exhausted, disheveled, and absolutely furious. I didn't get up to open the door. A moment later, I heard the familiar scrape of a key in the lock. The front door swung open, hitting the wall with a dull thud. Mom! David shouted, storming into the hallway. I turned the page of my newspaper. I'm in the kitchen, David. No need to yell. Sarah marched in right behind him, dropping her designer bag on my pristine counter. Her face was flushed red. Do you have any idea how humiliating last night was? She demanded. We had to stand in the lobby of a 5-star resort while the manager told us our card was declined. We had to beg my sister for flight money. I took a sip of coffee. That sounds like a very stressful financial situation, Sarah. Perhaps Aspen wasn't in your budget this month. David ran a hand through his hair, pacing the floor. You closed the account. You knew we were relying on that card for the trip. And then I log online and see Nolan holding the keys to Dad's car. Have you lost your mind? My mind is perfectly sharp, I replied, folding the newspaper neatly. Which is why I finally looked at the bank statements. That account was for emergencies, David. Not couples, massages, and ski passes. If you couldn't afford the trip on your own income, you shouldn't have gone. Sarah crossed her arms, glaring at me. You owe us an apology. And you are going to call Nolan right now and tell him you made a mistake. That car belongs to David. She stood tall, expecting me to crumble like I used to. She was about to realize her demands meant absolutely nothing in my house anymore. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I slowly stood up from the kitchen stool and walked around the island, stopping just a few feet away from my son. David, I said, holding out my right hand palm up. Give me your spare key. He froze his pacing, coming to an abrupt halt. What? My house key, I repeated. The one you just used to barge in here without knocking. Put it in my hand. Sarah let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. Are you serious? You're kicking us out after what you pulled. I turned my gaze to her. This is my home, Sarah. I pay the mortgage. I pay the property taxes. For 4 years, I allowed you to treat this house like a free storage unit, and me like an unpaid servant. That arrangement ended yesterday. David looked at me, a flicker of genuine panic replacing his anger. Mom? You're overreacting. We were just stressed about work. You can't just take the key back. I already have, I said, reaching over and lifting the key ring out of his loose grip. I swiftly detached the silver house key and dropped his car keys back on the counter. As for the Mustang, I continued walking toward the hallway closet. Arthur bought that car with his own money. He left it to me. I have the legal right to give it to a golden retriever if I see fit. I chose to give it to a man who respects the work that went into it. I opened the closet and pulled out the large plastic storage bin I had packed that morning. I dropped it heavily at David's feet. It was filled with Sarah's emergency overnight bags, the kids' old toys they refused to organize, and every item they had dumped in my spare room over the years. Here are your things, I said. David stared at the box, then looked around the kitchen. He was finally realizing that the safety net he had taken for granted his entire adult life had just vanished entirely. The silence in the kitchen was heavy. Sarah stared at the plastic bin on the floor, her usual sharp tongue momentarily paralyzed by the realization that I wasn't backing down. David's anger deflated, leaving behind a sudden, desperate backpedaling. Mom, come on. Let's sit down and talk about this. You're cutting us off because we missed one dinner. I am not cutting you off, David, I said gently, though my tone offered no warmth. I am setting you free. You and Sarah are successful adults. You clearly prefer luxury resorts over spending time in this house, so I am removing the burden of obligation. You no longer have to pretend to be busy. You no longer have to squeeze me into your schedule. Sarah finally found her voice, though it lacked its usual authority. You're punishing your own grandchildren because you're feeling petty. I love my grandchildren, I replied instantly. And my door will always be open to them. But I will not be used as a financial crutch or a free nanny so you can live beyond your means. From now on, if you need a babysitter, you will hire one. If you want a vacation, you will save for it. Your finances are your own. David looked at the empty counter where the keys used to sit. So, that's it. The account is gone. Dad's car is gone. What about the rest of the estate? His true concern slipped out bare and ugly. I offered a small, sad smile. My finances are my own, David, just as yours are. I stepped back and gestured toward the front door. Now I have a neighborhood association meeting in 20 minutes and I need to get ready. David picked up the heavy plastic bin, his shoulders slumped. Sarah grabbed her designer bag, refusing to make eye contact with me. As they walked out the door, David paused on the threshold. He looked back, perhaps waiting for me to soften to tell him I was just teaching him a lesson. I didn't say a word. I gently closed the door, the click of the lock echoing with finality. Months passed, and the changing seasons brought a profound sense of peace to my home. Without the constant low-level anxiety of anticipating Sarah's demands or David's neglect, I found my days surprisingly full. I joined a local community garden, started a book club, and finally had the time to read on my front porch without someone dropping off a basket of dirty laundry. Nolan kept his promise. Every other Sunday afternoon, the deep rumble of Arthur's 1968 Mustang would announce his arrival. We would take a drive down the scenic coastal highway, the windows down, listening to the old classic rock stations Arthur used to love. Nolan never asked me for a dime, and in return, I gained a true friend. David did call occasionally. The panic of the first few weeks eventually shifted into a cautious respect. Without the joint account subsidizing their lifestyle, he and Sarah had been forced to downsize their spending. There were no more spontaneous Aspen trips. When David asked to come over for coffee one Tuesday, I agreed. He sat at the same kitchen island, looking older, a little more tired, but undeniably more grounded. "I miss you, Mom," he admitted quietly, holding his mug. "I'm right here, David," I replied. "I always have been." We didn't have a tearful cinematic reconciliation. I didn't hand him a new house key, and I certainly didn't open a new bank account. We simply drank our coffee as two adults. He realized that day that he had to earn his way back into my life through genuine connection, not obligation. When he left, he hugged me, a real, lingering hug, before walking out to his car. I watched him drive away from the front window, feeling a quiet satisfaction. I was no longer a victim waiting in an empty chair. I had drawn my line in the sand, protected my peace, and finally started living my own life. And the view from this side of the boundary was absolutely beautiful.